Okay, let's get the show on the road. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today. Welcome to Unleashing Innovative Ideas to a Zero Waste Economy. It's Global Entrepreneurship Week, and it is an auspicious event, not only because it's an entrepreneurship week, but also because there are so many events happening around the world about sustainability. I mean, COP27 is currently underway. It started on the 6th of November and it ends on the 18th. I look forward to hearing people's different perspectives as to how COP27 went. But back to today, I'm really grateful that you are joining us, and I'm super excited to introduce the topic of today. So for Global Entrepreneurship Week, I specifically chose that we address the issue around zero waste and look at what we can do with what we have. And I'm an entrepreneur. Just before I just get ahead of myself, I would like to introduce myself. My name is Pretty Tulufelo Ndlovu. I'm the founder of Slow Textiles. I'm also a chapter director for Startup Huddles, the Global Entrepreneurship Network. I'm also the chapter director for Sustainability Africa Pretoria. With me in my team is Buhle, who is also my chapter co-lead at Sustainability Africa Pretoria. I am naturally a problem solver and a social entrepreneur, meaning that I see different problems within our society and try and find entrepreneurial solutions to those problems. And the reason I got involved with the likes of the Global Entrepreneurship Network as well as Sustainability Africa is because these organizations' main mission is to help anyone, anywhere get sustainable. So, ladies and gents, I would like to, again, welcome you to this incredible event. I'm going to quickly introduce you to our guests. In the room, I've got Wyomia Mouwers, who is the founder of Brand Ballistics, which is a sustainability and social impact marketing consultancy. She graduated from UCT with an arts degree and a postgraduate diploma in marketing management. She has a progressive 20 years working in corporate marketing, government, public education, and nonprofits, making her insightful marketing strategies and project manager on a broad range of stakeholders who thrive with more sustainable ethics and practices for a just transition towards a circular economy. Wyomia, please forgive me for butchering your bio. I'm going to give you 5 minutes just after I read this. Let me finish butchering it, I'm sorry. And then I'll give you 5 minutes to introduce yourself, right? So you can introduce yourself properly if in your own words. So Brand Ballistics is a marketing strategy partner collaborating with brands to achieve sustainability and social impact. And yeah, so I love your company. Can you please tell us a bit more about yourself and the work you do within the sustainability sphere as well as the circular economy?
Thank you, Pretty, and thank you for inviting me as a guest. I'm really honored. I think in this whole journey with sustainability and circular economy, we're all learning, and so I find it hard to consider myself a noteworthy participant who is knowledgeable on the topic, because I learn so much every day, and we are in a period of transitioning. And so in transitioning and behavioral change, there's also a lot of unlearning to do as well as learning. So yeah, you didn't do too bad, because those are my words. I submitted that, so I wrote it. Yeah, and it sums up. I started my career in marketing, and I left corporate marketing many years ago and went into education. And then at the end of, or in 2019, actually, I started freelancing. And one of my first gigs, actually, freelancing gigs, was working on the Financing the Future Global Climate Divest Invest Summit. And I think it was a great blessing in that just before COVID hit and before everyone became so invested in climate, in the climate crisis, sustainability, and circular economy, I had this intense deep dive into understanding the climate crisis and the urgency around us actioning. And yeah, and that's when I founded my company, and went back into where my career started in marketing. But I also was aware that I don't want to serve as a marketer in society for brands or corporates or for profit. I was very clear in that my purpose will be to make social impact. And as I started learning more about the climate crisis and I observed the landscape, I became very concerned about the just transition towards a circular economy and a more sustainable society, because what I then noticed is that it's marketed as something elitist. It's not necessarily accessible to the more marginalized people in our society. And hence my business, the focus of my business is sustainability and a very strong emphasis on social impact. And a lot of my work is with SMMEs and grassroots social enterprises. I'm particularly passionate about regenerative agriculture. So I work a lot with the community gardens in the townships, because for me, the food system, first of all, is one of the most important spaces where we can change behavior and make people climate aware and have them action it without even using all the highfalutin language and the buzzwords that the industry is polluted with at the moment and used by corporates for greenwashing, and almost alienates the average consumer. And so, for example, I've worked with Wonder Bag. And so Wonder Bag is such a great product, but if I go into a informal settlement where there's low literacy and people don't necessarily understand all the jargon with sustainability and reducing your carbon footprint, but I take a 50 Rand item, which automatically makes them reduce their carbon footprint and become more sustainable, and they are contributing towards the circular economy. And so that is really the type of brands that I love working with and that I partner with, almost unconsciously changing people's behavior and making them more sustainable. Yeah, that's a bit about me.
Well, thank you for joining us. We really look forward to having discussions with you and exchanging ideas and hearing more about your work, especially in the spaces where sustainability is needed. Yeah, so let me move on right along to our next guest. Our next guest is Chris White, who is the founder of Use It. He is also, just hang on. Got it. Yeah. Chris, I was just getting you to unmute. Okay, so Chris White is the founder of Use It. He is an MD and is into sustainable tech. Chris, I really love your work. You are also the co-founder of ASEN Foundation, director of Imagine If MPC, and also the director of Green Waste X and Green Agri X in Mauritius. Since 1992, Chris has been involved in environmental and sustainable project development across Africa, and channeled his focus into waste from 1999. He founded and headed Use IT, the Waste Materials Recovery Industry Development Program in Durban, South Africa, from 2009 to 2020, facilitating more than 2,600 jobs in the waste and recycling sector. In that time, Chris leveraged 4.5 times their funding. Okay, Chris, you'll tell us more about what this is, right? Because I'm also butchering your bio. And this funding was for the municipality to, well, I'm guessing this was for the municipality's landfill savings, as the bio says, and it created a model for green economic development and innovation in South Africa. Chris deals in every aspect of the waste stream to explore, invent, and create sustainable opportunities in the waste beneficiation that touch on waste management, water management, infrastructure, energy, social upliftment, environmental benefit, economic development, low carbon development, enterprise development, and skills development. These are all the key aspects of sustainability that drive the circular economy. Chris is recognized locally, nationally, and internationally through many awards and nominations. I'm not going to read out all those awards, Chris, because they're like more than 25 awards. So, Chris, welcome. Please introduce yourself.
Thank you very much, Pity, and thanks for butchering that completely. You did fine. That was actually yes, I'm involved in a whole host of different things. I mean, obviously, the focus really is around looking at circularity and the opportunities that it can bring us, as Wyomia said, in bringing about a just transition. And I think that's right across different sectors. So the focus really is to understand how that can bring us towards a climate-friendly future and moving towards sort of a low-carbon transition. And it does cross many different sectors. So it's not just about waste and waste recycling. Waste is one tiny component of what I do. I'm focused more on the African Circular Economy Network at the moment, and we are currently looking at project development application and creating an awareness of circular economy and the opportunities that it brings towards that transition, with 168 members in 42 African countries. So we really are a Pan-African organization, and the ASIN Foundation is also an extension of that, which allows us to bring capacity into different African countries. So the focus is about understanding the impacts and the outcomes, as opposed to the process itself. And it's understanding that waste is a key component to many of those, but it's not the be all and end all. But the idea is that obviously in nature, we do not have waste. Any component, a waste component from one is an input into another. And it's the same sort of focus we're looking at around that. Unfortunately, mankind is not very good at being sort of focused around the nature component, because we create products that become less available to downstream. So, yeah, from our own personal perspective, obviously we are made of carbon and hydrogen, and eventually we will go back into the earth. But things like our plastic and our oil and our pesticides and our herbicides are not going to do the same sort of thing. So it really is about trying to bring this just transition through in terms of understanding how that can impact livelihoods, sustainable development and upliftment right across every sector. So we work in agriculture, industry, water, energy, health, education, tourism, manufacturing, and understand the different components of that as to how we can look at actually creating a climate aware future, but that's also invested in and driving a climate friendly future. And we have the opportunities to do that in Africa. So it really is how we embrace that and how we share and network and collaborate and get people to understand that we're all in this boat together. And we're going to have about another 1 billion people on this continent in the next 40 years or 20, 30 years. So we need to know how to manage that. And we need to know how to make a change that is going to ensure a sustainable future for all of us.
Absolutely. And which is the reason why we are here today, ladies and gentlemen. I want us to really look at circularity within the South African context. So I got introduced to the circular economy at the end of 2019. So it's been about 3 years now. And the discussions then, back in 2019, were taking place around the globe. And none of the discussions were happening in Africa as much as they were happening in Europe and in America and other parts of the northern parts of the world. So after finding a circular economy business incubator, I got the opportunity to ideate and start researching and now developing a textile recycling company. I found a world of opportunities that I believe Africans and South Africans are currently missing out on, which is why today I would like for us to have this opportunity. It is Global Entrepreneurship Week, but it's also COP27. So these days are very important days where people are having different types of dialogues about sustainability. And I guess after these few days, we will have to see then what do we do from here, because it doesn't help that we sit and have discussions. But the one thing that I love about myself is that I'm very action driven. So this conversation, ladies and gents, will result in one action or another. So let's take a look at our topic today. Are we climate aware? Let's have a look at circularity practically in the South African context. And if you look at how we spelled aware, it's aware, like aware massacant, which is how we speak in our townships and in our in townships, and we speak slang. Chris, I'm not sure if they use aware in Durban, but I know people definitely use aware in some parts of Gauteng. Wyomia, I know with you, people definitely use away in Cape Town. So it's the reason why we are having this conversation. It's because the conversation around communication and language has come up quite a few times around why do we think people are not making as much efforts as we would like when it comes to climate action. So we see the circular economy and regenerative business systems as the few of many drivers towards a waste-free and sustainable economy. Therefore, the way we talk about climate change and efforts towards sustainability certainly affects the way people think about it. The stories we share about climate change dictates whether we act or not. And I would like for our panelists today, for our guests, I'd like for us to reflect on these questions, right? Let's take a look at what is the interconnection between sustainability and circularity. The second question would be, how can brands fast track our current climate awareness efforts using media? So there already has been conversations happening for a very long time. COP27 is a huge example of that, right? What is the media's role in accelerating climate awareness? So in your experience, I would like for you, Wyomia and Chris, just briefly reflect on that. I'll first go to you, Wyomia, and then I'll go back to you, Chris, and I'll go to the first question, right? For you, Wyomia, what is the interconnection between sustainability and circularity?
With circularity, and my understanding of circularity is that whatever and first of all, for me, circularity starts with design. It starts at the design process. And it needs, when you're talking circularity, and hence I use in my business profile description, that all stakeholders should be participants of the circular process, because it really starts with design, and every stakeholder in the production of whatever it is that you are taking to the market, and then the consumers, and what they do at the end of the full life cycle of whatever that item is, so that it's reduced into its natural state and goes right back into the environment with minimal impact on the natural environment. And so when I work with sustainable brands and sustainable fashion, and often with clients, there's maybe a need for education in that, not if you are using, especially in the environment where people are taking waste and producing products. So you are essentially just extending the lifespan of whatever was produced. But what happens when that product has lived its full life cycle? If we reduce it and it gets broken down, how much of an impact does it leave on the environment? And so for me, the interconnection between sustainability and circularity, it's important that not everything that is necessarily sustainable is circular, and hence the importance of considering the design process. And when you consider the design process, it almost probes you to ask more questions about the entire supply chain and what happens after and after and after, right up until the very end of the life cycle of that product. And that is where I think we'll start having consumers who become the propellers of, in the whole demand and supply cycle, where if they are asking those questions, so where does this come from, and where does that come from, and what's it made of, and if you tell me to recycle it. And so I irk many people when I ask questions, because if you market something, because we find in the marketing space, many people are using buzzwords. Oh, it's compostable. So if I ask you, how long does it take to compost? Or for example, a sanitary towel, you tell me it's compostable. So I tell you, I use various composting methods in my household. I can't imagine myself putting that product into any of my composting things. So how compostable is it? How long does it take to break down? And so the interconnection between sustainability and circularity, first of all, it's important for people to understand, what does circularity mean, and what and sustainability, and the definition of the two. And because everything that is sustainable is not necessarily circular, but it doesn't mean that it's bad because it's sustainable, but hopefully it moves us towards becoming more circular. But for me, the ultimate goal of circularity is that everything that I consume can be reduced back to its simplest form and have zero or minimal impact on the environment.
Awesome, thank you very much. I love your point about that everything can be sustainable, but not necessarily circular, right? Therefore, I mean, the circular economy right now, we see the circular economy as a driver, like a vehicle that will help us achieve sustainability. Therefore, there are other different types of if I can say business systems, or different types of systems that aren't necessarily just business systems, but different types of systems that can be key drivers to towards sustainability. And if we have more and more conversations like these as Africans, as South Africans, I think we would eventually try out different types of vehicles and different types of modalities that would drive us to sustainability. Chris, so
if I can just add, Pretty, especially when you talk about the African context. So when we look at our indigenous knowledge systems, our forefathers have been living sustainably and have been having very circular practices in the everyday consumption habits. And when you go to a gogo and you talk to her about sustainability and circularity, she might think that she's not doing it or that she's not a participant in the circular economy. But if you look at her habits, then it's probably most compatible and most compliant to circularity and sustainable living.
That is correct. That is true. So we need to have more and more conversations amongst ourselves as Africans and really look at what it means to be sustainable. And you know, everybody who is in Africa, everybody who is in South Africa, like you were saying, we've had to do with little resources for a while. So if we look at our adversities as Africans, like the resources that we've had to make use of aren't that much, and that has caused us to be sustainable with what we do with the resources that we have. Chris, I'm going to come to you, and everyone in the audience, welcome and thank you so much for joining us today. Please feel free to share your questions in the chats. Please feel free to share your comments. Raise your hand if you would like to share anything, and I will gladly unmute your mic, or I believe you can unmute your mic. But if you would like to add anything at all, please feel free to raise your hand and share. Chris, I'm going to come to you with this question. What is the interconnection between sustainability and circularity in your own views?
Well, I think the two are intrinsically linked. You cannot separate the two of them. There's definitions of circularity, there's definitions of sustainability, and they're going to be varied depending on who you speak to. I think part of the problem that we have at the moment is that circularity has now really been entrenched, and unfortunately, I think the academics have got a hold of it now. So now what's happened is that this is the kind of definition that you have. But I think, as Wyomia said, there's a lot of stuff that we do in our daily lives, and particularly our forefathers who were far more sustainable than we are now. And I think that we're a product of the sort of commercial sector that we've been brought up in for the last 60, 70 years. But the connectivity is there. If some of the presentations that I give around circular economy are really to look at understanding how we can achieve each of the sustainable development goals through applying circular economy principles. So whether you're looking at that from a poverty perspective, a health perspective, a life on land, gender specificities, all of those can be connected to taking a circular economy approach. And again, we've got to try and bring it out from understanding that it's not just about waste. Circularity is not just about waste, because a lot of people misunderstand what waste is. So we often think that I've got a product and now I can't do anything with it, so it goes to the landfill site, that's waste. It's far bigger than that. There are so many other different components of that most of our people, consumers, are realistically unaware of. The fact that the energy that we have, which when it's on, is really around looking at understanding what are the waste products around that. And the waste, if you look at it from the coal mining perspective, what are the impacts of coal mining? How does that impact water quality? How does it impact air emissions? How does that affect your health? When you then use the coal and it now becomes energy, now we have a fly ash, which is another byproduct that now becomes a problem and has similar adverse effects on the environment. And then we have the impact in terms of the mining itself with regards to biodiversity, impact on human lives. So when we start to unpack what it is that we're looking at, there are so many different components to it that circularity embodies. So for example, a just transition, when we were chatting about that continuously, one of the things we're looking at now is a just energy transition in Africa. And we can't continue to look at the systems that we've been using or trying to bring on sort of European or Western ideologies. We cannot, as a continent, afford and implement massive scale grid transmission lines to distribute energy. Because first of all, only your big corporates and your governments can afford that. And even the governments can't afford that, then they put the country into hock in terms of debt to try and put that forward. But then if we look at the fact that it marginalizes the people, because now the people become dependent on energy from a single supplier. And then you need to look at mass scale applications, which are really not sustainable. Whereas a just transition could look at small scale systems. So we're looking at systems like solar, but also small scale hydro systems. There are technologies around from an innovation perspective where one can power up an entire village using literally a 1 meter drop in water without having to build a big dam and a big power station to be able to drive that. So we've got to look at decoupling the income of your corporates and your governments from looking at the control and management of these services that we have that are unsustainable. If you look at the fact that Africa has enough water resources to power the entire world 5 times over, but that means in terms of the current interpretation is that we need to build massive dams. Now, massive dams means that you have a block on supply. So your water flow is impeded, which impacts your biodiversity. That has impacts between countries in terms of who controls the water where. That leads to unrest. It causes flooding. It results in people being moved and displaced from their original homes. There are so many negatives to that. So the circular economy, again, understands and unpacks all the different interconnectivities between that. So when you start looking at these things, you cannot look at water as a single component. You cannot look at energy or food. You have these nexus linkages and interconnectivities between those. You have the water, energy, food nexus, for example. And everything is connected. So we need to look at the entire value chain. And when we need to understand that, most people, when they perceive circular economy or sustainability, they don't think about the bigger picture. They don't understand all the interconnectivities of everything in your life. Where does your food come from? I mean, the fact is that we have a massive problem in Africa with urbanization. And that is going to be a huge issue going into the future. But a lot of what happens is that we're taking people who lived in the country who are now not seeing the opportunities there, and they move from the rural areas to the urban areas where they cannot sustain themselves, and our cities aren't built for that. How do we change that dynamic? How do we look at it? Because people move to the cities, but then where does the food come from? Food comes from the rural areas. Then that means you now need to build greater infrastructure. You need your water access, your energy access to supply the requirements to people now living in urban environments where they are living in unsustainable houses. So there's all these different components we need to look at in unpacking the entire value chain. So there are mitigation opportunities. So we can look at urban agriculture to try and resolve the issue that we basically buy our food from somewhere that might be 300, 400, 500 kilometers or a country away from us. How do we become more self-sustainable in terms of food? How do we make that food more nutritious? How do we make it more acceptable or available to everybody that's out there? So we're not just dependent on the big farmers. We're now looking at the small growers, and we're reducing supply chains. We're reducing logistics. We're reducing waste, and then utilizing those resources into that whole system. So everything starts to combine and brings together. That's where we look at the circularity. Things just start coming together and they go in circles. There are opportunities in terms of maybe breaking some of those circles, because if we look at it from an academic perspective, to achieve 100% circularity in many applications is just not realistic. But if we start taking steps in that direction to move towards circularity and greater sustainability and a just transition to incorporate people and include that. So we're looking at social upliftment and inclusion within a different type of economy, and not controlled by big corporates and governments. That reaches right across every single sector that we are involved in. So anybody is out there as a consumer, they've got to send the kids to school. Where do they buy their shoes from? Where does the food come from? How do they get to work? You know, where is their water coming from? Very few people really understand the intricacies of this, and there are so many components we need to be aware of. And yet it's really put out there sometimes as, yeah, make sure you use the right packaging. And packaging is one tiny component of the circular sort of component. So let's bring it all together.
Yeah, thank you, Chris. I really love a few, actually, almost every point that you mentioned, I'm like, yes, Chris, yes. So starting with the point of urbanization, right? And understanding what circularity really means. So if we looked at what we can do to reverse urbanization and used the principles of the circular economy to develop or use communities where people really come from as spaces for us to create products that we are going to exchange as a community. So if you can imagine like one rural area, for example, one little rural community, if that community had a place to farm, well, most rural places are farms anyway, right? But if that rural community had a place to process the raw materials and develop products from those raw materials and be able to safely distribute the products, it would allow the people living in that small community an understanding of where the products come from. So maybe we need to start having conversations about de-urbanization. So I have a few, well, two questions. Let me just have a look here. It's not a question, it's two comments from David. David says, yeah, guys, please let's remember to invest behind the human resource that is behind the circular economy. It's not with, David, can I put you on so you can just share what you were saying? Because you shared two comments that I think are valuable. Can I ask you to unmute so you can just share what you were saying in the comments? Okay, I'm going to move on for now, and then David. Yes.
Hi.
Yes, hi.
Sorry, I missed that.
Yes.
I have bad connectivity, so I've just been in between the hearing what was said. So could you please repeat?
So there is a comment in the chat, well, two comments by David, and I just wanted him to share what he was saying. But if you have something to share on what the interconnection between sustainability and circularity is, and also if you would like to comment or ask a question as to what our guest speakers have shared, please, you're more than welcome to do so.
Okay, so I've joined out of curiosity because I was also looking at getting into upcycling, and we actually started a project regarding like re-energizing clothes, like adding, like making it sort of like old clothes, turning it into e-textiles. So yeah, we started off the project, but we never really got quite far. But you'll have to accept my apologies today because I'm in between finishing my thesis and listening in. So yeah, but I'm still I don't have a solid comment to make, but from what I've heard, I'm still processing. So yeah, sorry about that. And I saw that you requested to unmute, so I unmuted, but I think I'm just happy listening in today and staying quiet for a bit. But yeah, sorry about that.
Oh, no, it's okay. It's actually my mistake. You were just below David. And when I was asking David to unmute, because I was reading out something that he commented on, and I just wanted him to share verbally because I couldn't continue because I couldn't quite get his question or his comment clearly. David, you will share when you do have a moment. Please feel free to unmute and add a comment or a question. So I'm gonna move on right along to the next question for our panelists. Thank you so much for the thought-provoking comments and the knowledge that you are sharing, Chris and Wyomia, that after this, we actually have quite a lot of things to reflect on and quite a lot of actions to initiate and instigate and activate. So my second question is, and perhaps I shouldn't say brands, right? I should say organizations, because it is not only on brands, but it's a collaborative effort between stakeholders to fast track our current awareness and our current actions towards climate action and being sustainable with our resources. So how can organizations fast track our current awareness using media? Because we're on Zoom right now. We text each other every day. We use phone calls every day. We watch television. We get on the internet. All those different things are different components of media that we can use to inform people, right? So I'd love to know, Wyomia, how do you think organizations can fast track our current awareness using media?
The word fast track scares me a bit because I think fast tracking has resulted in greenwashing. I don't, in traditional media, so I started my marketing career 20 years ago, and things have changed so much with social media, and that I think, and many people differ with me on this, but I feel that social media has put so much power in the hands of the consumer. So it's not organizations necessarily doing the fast tracking or the awareness, it's the consumers. By sharing their stories, if we look at a platform like TikTok, it's ordinary people putting their lives out there in real time, sharing what they do, how they do it. And that I think is going to make a bigger contribution than brands who have big corporate budgets, because especially if we look at Gen Z, who is probably the most climate aware and whose lifestyle is most sustainable, they are also that generation that's most dominant on social media and who call out. So last week, I think it was, one of the big brands, FMCGs, put out a sponsored ad on social media that the toothbrushes no longer come with a plastic film on the cardboard covering. But then people called them out and said, but you're promoting a plastic toothbrush with a lifespan of 3 months. We are using bamboo handle toothbrushes. We are using bristles, which are sustainable. So consumers are becoming more savvy, more knowledgeable, and brands, I don't think, can keep up, because fast tracking means that whole process of creative teams and everyone wanting to put their stories out to make their product appealing or to show that they are being sustainable, they can't keep up with the extent that people are acquiring knowledge, and people are acquiring knowledge on their own without being dictated to by brands, because social media has put so much power in the hands of the ordinary consumer. And also for me, in terms of sustainability and circularity, there's no the level of perfection, and what Chris said, like it seems an unattainable goal to be perfectly circular. But we need more people to be sustainable imperfectly than a few people to do it perfectly, because that's going to be the major impact. And so when you start getting brands involved and advertising agencies who draw this perfect picture of this is what sustainability is about, because I try to practice sustainability, and if I just reflect on my own personal journey, there's been lots of imperfections and I don't do it right. Even my recycling, like just yesterday, I wash out my cans because we have the dirt pickers who take out the cans, and I try to separate things and do it perfectly. But there's sometimes when I'm in the kitchen and then my cans do end up in the general trash. But it's the 5% of the time that I don't do it. But there's the awareness. And so for me, the transition towards circularity and becoming more sustainable, it's something slow, and it's a conscientization to being more ethical and more conscious living and more ethical consumption. So I don't think it's something that is to do with speed, but the awareness, I suppose, in getting more people to be knowledgeable about it. But the transition and the lifestyle changes and the consumer behavior, that is something that I think needs to be emphasized, that it's slow changes. Because if I look, when I started growing my own food in my garden, it's a process of more than a year, and understanding the seasons and learning how to grow food organically without pesticides. So living sustainably, and even just the design and with waste, as Chris spoke quite a bit about waste. And when I spoke on the previous question, I said it starts in the design process. We need to design out waste. The only way we are going to get rid of waste is by designing waste out. And that is really where it's important to make everyone realize that they are stakeholders in this transition towards a more circular economy. I'd also like to emphasize the importance of investors and those who have the power of the economy, economics involved in the system. We in Entrepreneurship Week, and Priti and I met in a circular economy incubator, and how hard is it to find funding for sustainable social enterprises, because everyone wants to know about how are you going to scale, and what is your profit margin. And I think many of us who operate in the social entrepreneurship space and in the sustainability and circular economy space, our heads are so deep in social impact and not necessarily profitability. And so I often ask the question, how compatible is sustainability or circularity in a capitalist system? Yeah, and like Chris said, when you talk about circular economy, it's your consumption and the questions that you ask. So for example, I started buying my vegetables I live close to the Lentegeur Psychiatric Hospital, and not too long ago I discovered that they've got a large community garden and they have a Friday market, and I love it. And so when I marketed or shared it in my friendship circle, I said you can reduce your carbon footprint because they sell the vegetables on the site. There's no packaging. You're not using a lot of fuel to go to a supermarket. The water that they're using, it's grey water from the hospital system, and the social impact, it's amazing because the garden is worked by the patients. And that is the stories that brands need to tell. So I think if brands are going to do us a favor, they need to be transparent about the entire system of how they design whatever it is that they're taking to market, and the entire supply chain, because customers want to know those stories. And I find as a marketer, those are the tidbits really that's drawing customers at the moment. So it's not about what brands are pushing to customers, but it's feeding them information and stories about the product or about the service that pulls customers. So it's in sustainability marketing, it's more about the pull than the push, and the information that they're bombarding us with and telling us how fancy the product is with big billboards and catchy lines and phrases and exciting campaigns. Yeah, customers want to know more about the bits that's going to pull them towards your brand.
Yeah, thank you very much for all those valid points, Wyomia. Well, to your question of can sustainability, circularity, or social impact, I can't remember what you said, but something like, can social impact coexist with capitalism? I believe they can, because if we reverse things and just have an understanding of where consumerism started, we can use the same systems they used, just with a little more awareness right now, I believe. Chris, I'd love to hear your thoughts. How can organizations and brands fast track our efforts, like consumers' efforts, towards circularity and sustainability using media?
I'm going to take a leaf out of Wyomia's book, because I think that putting that into the question also promotes the opportunity for greenwashing. So it shouldn't be organizations and brands using media. It should also be people using media. And I think we see a lot of greenwashing in the industry. It's actually quite sickening how much greenwashing we get, and somebody will talk about the particular product that now they've got that now have a blue bottle instead of a white bottle, and how fantastic it is, and yet it makes it unrecyclable. And it's they do the launch during Plastic Free Week as a global. There's some strange things that are going on. So a lot of greenwashing is a problem, but I think that there's a lot of media opportunities. And if we look at social media at the moment, whether you're looking at Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, whatever it is, there's a lot of really good stories that are coming out there. And we need to showcase those ideas, but we need to showcase also the good stuff, but understand the reasons behind it. If we have a particular brand saying, we believe that washing your hands is very important because of health and X, Y, and Z, believe me, they're not trying to sell you health. They're trying to sell soap. They're not trying to sell you health. So this is the reality of what we need to try and understand as the consumer, is what we're listening to. And unfortunately, social media is also not verified or checked. At the same time, a lot of the messaging we get from the big brands is not verified or checked. It's their opinion. So we need people that are more aware of the realities of what's out there. So we can really, what we want to try and do is we want to celebrate the good stories that are out there. And there are some great stories. ASIN has been working with Footprints Africa, for example, to map out over 500 case studies of circular economy projects across Africa that really showcase the good things that are happening. And as you say, do we want to scale that? Maybe people don't want to scale it. Maybe we need 300 people doing the same thing instead of one person becoming the big commercial success story. And that's, again, comes back to the just transition, is that the idea behind accelerators is not necessarily that each of these social startups wants to become the next Pick and Pay or the next Woolworths. They're quite happy doing what they're doing because they're producing good food for the communities. And what's wrong with that? Let's make that good. So there's a lot of good opportunities where we can use media to understand the difference behind a sustainable future and what we have come to know as this commercial sort of capitalist sort of process going forward. Again, I have nothing against capitalism. I think it's healthy, it's good for the economy. Yeah, the good ones will win, But at the same time, what it's also done is that if you look at food security in this country, we've lost the concept of food security. People don't grow their own food anymore because I don't need to. If I'm not employed, I'm going to get a government grant, which means at the end of the month, I've got some money. I'll go to Checkers or wherever, and I'll go and buy my food. That's not food security. We've forgotten how to grow our own food. We've forgotten how to be self-sufficient. We've forgotten that we can do it. I travel extensively across Africa, and if you go right throughout Africa, you see township economies very well established. And the reality is that because they don't have any other opportunity, they don't have any other way around that. If you don't grow your own food and if you don't barter with your neighbors, you're going to starve to death. It's as simple as that. So, you know, every second house is doing something with reconditioned tires, or they're making furniture out of wood or pallets, or they're making sauces and jams, and you create this township economy. We've lost that in this country, and I think a lot of what we see in terms of township economies at the moment is a spaza shop on the corner, and normally that's run by somebody who's a foreigner who's buying product from outside the country to sell it to you. I mean, that's not sustainability. So we need to be really aware, again, of what this all means in terms of how we become climate aware. And understand that everything that we do as individuals becomes part of that system. So the media is very important, but we need to understand the limitations of media. Wyomia, you mentioned Generation Z perhaps being the most sustainable. I tend to disagree with that, because each new generation that comes is more of a consumer than the last generation. You know, so our Generation Z are out there with the latest fancy cell phones, and you know, they're shopping at Woolworths, and you know, there's an unsustainability that we're just constantly building into it without understanding the context of what it is that makes us unsustainable and going back to basics. And that's where we need to get back to that messaging. And that messaging is important, when we need to understand, where does our food come? Where does our food come from? What makes it sustainable? What makes it regenerative? That is not going to have a negative impact on our environment. It's not going to have a negative impact on our biodiversity, on water issues, on our air quality. We don't understand all of that. And that's where the media is very important, getting people to understand that, understand what this is all about. So we talk about climate, we talk about carbon being the big bad bear. It's not the big bad bear. Carbon is not our biggest issue. Our biggest issue is land use change and population, unsustainable population expansion, where we're doing things in an unsustainable manner with now trying to feed a bigger nation using bigger monocrop agricultural applications that are destroying forests and using herbicides and pesticides and destroying our water through poisoning those networks. How do we change that? And that's where we need to understand the whole dynamic of what it really means. So media is going to be important to getting the messaging across. But who manages the messaging? Okay, so you know, whether you're using Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn or whatever it might be, who's vetted that message? And is it the reality, or is it somebody's version of the reality? So there needs to be a background where we can get to understand a more basic knowledge of what makes things sustainable, and what is climate, what is climate awareness, what is climate mitigation, adaptation. And we're seeing that now, post COP26, leading in now to COP27, where we're starting to see alignment of the financial sector. Climate finance is now aligning with sustainability. So we're starting to see that change, where it's now becoming mandatory through systems like the ISSB, excuse me, where it's now being measured. What is your impact as a brand, as an organization? What is your carbon footprint? Are you being sustainable? And how do you tie that to financing? So if you're not sustainable, your financing, you're basically going to become irrelevant in the next 4 to 5 years. Linking in finance with sustainability and making sure that it is counted by an external organization where it is transparent and see-through, and we can look at making sure we're moving in the right direction.
Thank you for that, Chris. What I'm getting from this is fast tracking only promotes greenwashing, right? And fast tracking will only lead us to more and more unsustainable business practices and unsustainable systems. So it's rather better to do it slowly and do it with a whole lot of people, with 1,000 people in a village starting something and exchanging amongst themselves, better than having one organization or one company being the sole producer and the sole distributor of products and services. These are really valid points and really great points. Thank you very much, Chris and Wyomia. If anybody has any questions or comments, please feel free to raise your hand, and or please actually feel free to share now. I'm just going to look in the comments. Okay. My eyes are terrible, right? So I'm going to, because I've got a black screen in front of a thing here. I'm going to ask Shraddha, you were sharing, you typed something, and would you be able to read it out to us? Okay, I'm going to give it a shot.
Sure.
Oh, there she is.
Okay,
Hey,
sure. Hi, sorry. Okay, so what I was saying is that from the perspective of now currently finishing up my MBA, a data scientist, and also a bit of background, I'm an environmental science graduate as well. So the triple bottom line, which is an old concept and, which has been reviewed and stuff, has always been close to my heart. And it's the reason I, going along my path, I took up an MBA. I'm still wondering where it's going to go, but I'm currently, to give you a bit of background and some additional comment, is I'm doing my thesis and I'm trying to draw comparison between plant physiology and like financial indicators in business, so that we can say that you do take lessons from nature. There is that interconnectivity, and there's a lot of talk around resilience in business these days. And with regards to that, I was focusing on one particular plant where you could say, okay, if this means this in terms of business language, and looking at nature, and they say it's a jungle out there, and just trying to incorporate a bit more of nature in business. But yeah, getting back to your question, that's just a bit of background information. Yeah, I do agree that social media can be used, but right now I do agree also that there's a lot of greenwashing going on. But when businesses and brands think, okay, I think they call it ESG now, they go with the environmental social governance. It's more from the point of, okay, we're posting something on social media to create brand equity, if they focus on the low-house market, or they looking at it from a compliance perspective, which is, because you are required to report on your carbon footprint and et cetera, et cetera. So it's either those two, but the entrepreneurs or the people or the employees rather are not built with that culture of thinking that, hey, we need to focus on the concept of holism. We need to understand that what we do as people to the planet for our profits, there's this interconnectivity, the sort of like domino effect that's going on. And the day I think we manage to help people cognize that, you may be using social media because that's the fastest way to communicate right now. Maybe the day we are able to effectively do this using social media, either as people, activists, or brands, then I feel that, we will be teaching something. So it's not the means by which, it's not who it's doing it, it's what we are putting out there. And I think it requires some thought as to how do we get people, they say Ubuntu and I am because you are, but how many people really actually feel that? And especially with businesses, businesses have the potential. This is, again, why I'm doing this MBA, going from environmental science to IT to data science to the MBA. People are thinking, what's wrong with this girl? She's gone all over the place. But, the reason I I'd like to see this happy people, happy profit, happy planet notion. I know it's very airy fairy pie in the sky, but that's a concept that I'd like to merge. And I really believe that if they had a conference recently, and I think there was a lot of focus on, okay, there's lessons from nature, blah 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 blah, but people are not really making that merge. They teach you about systems thinking in some of the lectures. I think it was in international business strategy or something, but nobody really, when they start these businesses, when these MBA graduates go on, not many of them keep that at heart. I was fortunate to have started with environmental science as like a foundation, and I think I've been an activist, sort of, well, not active, a pacifist rather. I've been a pacifist for quite a while, starting my journey young. I think when COP came to Durban, I attended COP as part of Plan for the Planet and all of that. But the thing is, we need to instill that culture of interconnectivity, and that is what's gonna maybe, I wouldn't want to come in and say drive the circular economy, but it's going to push us forward in the right direction. So it doesn't matter who, it doesn't matter where and how, it's what you are pushing and what you are putting in. And that's just my 2 cents worth. Peace. All right, it's cool.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, Shraddha. You touched on something that gave me goosebumps right now, right? Ubuntu. If we for real look at what that means and we remember who we are as Africans, none of these things about like fast tracking systems and doing this so quickly and producing this and greenwashing and all of this will affect us much. Just remember where we came from, like what our forefathers used to do, and not just from a resources perspective, but from a living with each other as people point of view. And we won't have greenwashing, I think. So if anybody else has a question or a comment, please feel free to do so. Okay, very short comments I can read. Chris says, happy people, profit, and planet. It is possible. And Wyomia says, you should join a permaculture community, happy people, profit, and planet. There you go, Shraddha, there's a permaculture community. If anyone else would like to share, please feel free to do so. In the meantime, I'm going to move on to the next question, which is the last question, right? Which I think we in some way or another did answer this question, which is, what is the media's role in accelerating climate awareness? Okay, so this time around, it's not fast tracking, it is accelerating. So if we were, because the reason we're all having climate awareness conversations, it's because it's a bit of an emergency, right? And we do kind of need to accelerate our conversations. And Wyomia, you've mentioned stories, how we can tell stories and how we can combine that with the messages that we drive. We can combine that with social media and combine that with the thought leadership of the younger people who are Gen Zs, and that would help us fast track climate awareness, right? And I guess this time, if I'm not asking the very same question that I asked previously in a different way, please see if you can engage this one differently, right? What is the media's role in accelerating climate awareness? Wyomia?
When we talk about the media, and like we've touched on this in the previous question, that there's social media, there's mainstream media, I interact, and most of my awareness and my education at the moment, it's coming from alternative media sources. So for example, I do belong to permaculture community, and I found those to be happy people. And a lot of my purchases are from local markets, the farmers markets. I don't know how big it is in up in the north, but in Cape Town there's a strong culture of farm to table and farmers markets, and a very rich and growing community of people who are growing their food and selling it or bartering. We have lots of seed swaps. Every weekend there's seed swaps. And so a lot of the climate awareness that I get at the moment, it's in conscientized communities, and they are on alternative media sources. And then another aspect of media that we maybe not see as mainstream media. So I love going to the theater, and I found that many theater practitioners have started producing art and work that places a spotlight on climate awareness issues. And so, you know, like there's when you are transitioning, and I think this is the ethos that we should all adapt, that in this transitioning period, what is my role, or what is the responsibility that I have, and how will I execute that responsibility in contributing towards climate awareness? Because, and I've said this before, it's not about information being pushed on us. And because if we lay it in the hands of the media, we lay it in the hands of the corporates, for me, it's really about each and every one of us who are inhabiting the planet to take responsibility for our consumption and our behavior.
Thank you for that, Wyomia. And again, when I said remembering who we are, right, I also remembered something that Strada mentioned about nature, right, about systems thinking, biomimicry. So, I mean, like, remembering again that we are part of nature. We are essentially nature, and in every single problem that we have in our modern society, I think the question we can ask is, what would nature do? How would nature solve this problem? And use those systems that have been formed in educational institutions, such as design thinking processes and thinking systems and biomimicry and all those things. Those things are like practical systems that can help us really look at, okay, the theory, and then go into the field and then try things out and then see how possible it is. And if we do, we will find that it actually is possible, and it could be as simple as just following nature's the rhythms and seasons, and not being impatient with things. So yeah, Wyomia, you are, please feel free to
yeah. And it's you know, you cannot live sustainably in one part of your life or one space that you inhabit. And one of my partners does it so well on his business premise. So first he started, and he really loves what he practices what he preaches. So in his community, he started a recycling project. On his business premise, he's gotten his workers to participate in a challenge of doing the same in their communities at home. Of course, they apply those principles in the workplace, but that is how his ethos on sustainable living has translated into his workforce. But a conscientized workforce, automatically his customers and his clients benefit from that, because their supply chain is affected. And that translates to their families in their homes, because if you're doing it at work, you're doing it in your community, you're going to do it in your home. And that, for me, is the ultimate goal. When every space we inhabit, we apply principles of climate awareness and sustainable living and conscious living and ethical consumption.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that. Chris, what is your thought on the media's role in accelerating climate awareness?
I think the problem is first of all, is that the media needs to be educated. And we often see mismessaging that's coming through. And what I want to try and get across is maybe to say, how do we look at getting more scientific knowledge out there? Yeah, put it obviously into something that the general public is going to be able to understand and to digest. But that opportunity really is to say, what is the issue? And we all listen to it and we all go, oh, carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is going to kill us all, and carbon dioxide is terrible. First of all, understand that carbon dioxide is actually the same thing that created the coal in the first place. So if you look at the Cretaceous period when coal was made 350 million years ago, the carbon in the atmosphere was 4 times what it is now. And that basically created a huge amount of vegetation, which now becomes our coal of today. And as you see, plants will absorb CO2. High CO2 is good for plants. The CO2 is not the enemy. It's the management of the system that's the enemy. So CO2, the levels are unacceptable now because nature is no longer there to be able to balance it, which means we don't longer have the forests available that are going to absorb that CO2 and convert that into oxygen, which is what we breathe. So it's about balance, and we need to create that balance and try and see how we get to understand the messaging that comes across. So if we look at that from the perspective of agriculture, for example, we keep getting thrown to the wolves, because what happens is that the big agriculture guys come out and they say, right, our maize is not doing what it used to do. So it's really because, you know, we've got problems with drought and we've got problems with this, that, the next thing. So instead of trying to look at that problem, their issue is now, let's put in a GMO crop that's more drought resistant. A GMO crop which your body is not used to digesting for a start. But then we need to add more herbicides and pesticides to make it available, you know, so that we're not going to destroy our crops, which then poisons the environment and we all get cancer. These are all components that we're just not thinking about. We've got to come back to understanding what that message is. So the message really is that we need to look at the application in terms of what is sustainable and what's coming forward. And how do we get that message across that everybody understands they have a role to play? As a consumer, you can choose a particular product that is going to have a better impact. You can refuse a particular type of plastic. You can refuse to use single-use plastics or cotton earbuds with plastic components on it. Those are small steps that each individual person can make. Yeah, you can look at the application around understanding what is plastic and get people to understand that a bioplastic is not necessarily a compostable plastic or a biodegradable plastic, as Wyomia said before. It's getting the information across, and that's what people need, is they need realistic information that has been tested and secured by a good scientific thought process, where we can put that into digestible chunks that people then understand what the role is. Yeah, nothing wrong with carbon, but if we don't have the plants in place, because we're deforesting everything, because now we need energy is just like the wrong way of looking about it. How do we look at regenerative agroforestry applications? How do we look at regenerative agricultural practices? How do we look at it in terms of making sure that we use our resources properly? Those are the different ways that we need to try and make it happen. And the media needs to make those messages available so that people understand that. Without the hype, there's too much, oh, we're all going to die tomorrow. We're not going to die tomorrow. You know, that's not going to happen. The reality is that we've engineered our way into this mess, and we can certainly engineer our way out of this mess. So it's a case of understanding what are the realities of what we can do. What can we do as individuals? How do you do that by voting with your wallet? Because most people don't have the ability to make that change, but they can as a consumer. So getting the right messaging out there and getting people to pay attention, and that's what's going to start changing things slowly but surely. And then everybody does their bit. Everyone must do their bit. If you have a source separation program in your area, everybody must do it. There's no point in me doing it in my neighborhood and the rest of the people in my street don't bother. That doesn't make sense. So be part of the solution, not part of the problem.
Thank you for that, Chris. So tried, tested, scientific, factual, truthful information, more of that needs to be out there. And I couldn't agree more, because there's then so many misleading, so much misleading information that just keeps going out, and then also cripples people from even doing anything, because then it gets confusing, and then we end up just going, okay, never mind, I'm not gonna do anything. So yeah, thank you so much. What are your, is there anything that you would like to add to this, Wyomia? Like the overall topic, the overall discussion, is there anything that you would like to add?
I think Chris and I both sang the same song in saying that we each have, as individuals, we each have collective responsibility. And even if you look at the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, for me, one of the most important ones are partnerships, because we're not going to achieve anything if we don't collaborate. And there's so much interconnectivity of various stakeholders in the system. So, for example, we spoke about the financial industry. We're speaking about, and they are keeping corporates accountable. We have activists keeping governments accountable with their policies and the implementation of those policies. We also have activist organizations necessary to keep them accountable. So there's individual responsibility and collective effort of keeping each other, the various entities in society, be it government, corporate, keeping each other accountable, yeah, on whether we are being ethical. And so Shadra spoke about in the corporate space, everyone is now focusing on ESG. And sadly, in many of the forums that I sit, very few of them talk about governance. I mean, we're living in South Africa, a country where governance should be with the unethical behavior and the high level of corruption. Governance for me is probably one of the most underrated parts of ESG that no one is focusing on, because we talk about greenwashing, but if your governance is not in place and you're not keeping your leadership accountable, and there's no consequences for behaving unethically or being corrupt, then how can I trust you to be sincere in what you put out there in terms of your environmental or your sustainability practices? So yeah, personal responsibility and accountability for me is key in us being or making substantial impact and progress in terms of sustainability and circularity.
Thank you very much for that. Just when you mentioned, well, I just remembered now the SDG on responsible production and consumption might be a bit of help here, a bit of guidance as to how we can start driving messages and telling stories and so on and so forth. Shraddha has added something to the comments, and she says, consider the use of media to promote gamification of green good deeds. That is a fantastic point. So, we spend a lot of time on digital platforms playing games. If we created games that would shape our perceptions, it would help, right? Thank you for that, Shraddha. And then, okay, you were just agreeing that we need to speak with one scientific voice. Chris, do you have any final thoughts?
Yeah, I think we talk about things like ESG, and we need to understand, put that into perspective. Environmental, social, and corporate governance reporting The organizations with the best ESG scorecard globally in the past decade have been the oil and gas companies. Okay, put that into perspective. And the reason is because they were compliant. They filled in their report cards. They weren't very good, but they filled them in. But because they filled them in, they got a good mark. So then they market the hell out of that from a greenwashing perspective, saying we have an impeccable ESG scorecard. But the reality is now that's changing. People are starting to see through that stuff. And what we're seeing coming out of these big events like the COP events, is that we are starting to make it more transparent and more reliable information, where there needs to be an external party that is looking at having an unbiased opinion of that to make it more transparent and digestible for the man in the street. So we're starting to see that move, and we're starting to see alignment of finance with sustainability. We're starting to see alignment of finance with accountability. And that is the big difference. So now what they've done at long last is they've actually connected the buck with the message. So if you are doing the wrong thing, you're now trying to, as an oil company, now invest another $300 billion into a new oil field. The way it's going to work now is that the finance company is going to look at your track record and they're going to say, but hang on a second, from a sustainability perspective, you've scored very low on that from a carbon perspective. Which means that if you want to borrow money, you're going to borrow money, but it's going to be at 5 times what so-and-so will borrow it for because they have been sustainable. So they're making that move. So it's not just a consumer. We need to understand that we have very limited power in terms of what we think we can do, but we have a collective power. We're now seeing that coming through from the collective at an international and global level, which is going to have a huge impact, not only on the big brands, because the big brands are now going to put the pressure down their supply chains, which means that all the SMMEs on the upstream and the downstream are now have to comply with what the big brand needs. So now everyone's going to have to start playing ball. So don't sit back and think as a small SME or a little sort of mom and pop type company that this is not going to affect you. It's going to affect everybody. And that's what we're seeing, is we're starting to see a real change now, where they're starting to align transparency, accountability, and really just cut through the BS and let's get on with things in the right way that we should do. So I'm very positive about the way forward. We have a long way to go. But again, as a scientist, I always maintain we have created this mess, we can fix it. And it's often not about academics, it's often about going back to basics. You know, when we look at things like biomimicry, I remember who mentioned that. What have we done? We've forgotten we are part of nature. Biomimicry is a key to that. And if you look at permaculture or regenerative agriculture, it's very much around biomimicry. It's about getting back to nature, giving back to nature, putting carbon back in the soil, increasing your microbial biodiversity, and looking at all those different things that's going to make a positive impact. Because now scientists are starting to understand that. They're starting to say, well, if we put carbon back into the soil, what happens is it creates two things. One is it creates a system called hydrosynthesis. We've all heard of photosynthesis, which is light and CO2 converts into sugars. But there's also hydrosynthesis. So a microbially diverse soil with a high carbon content actually procures its own moisture out of the atmosphere at night. So what it does is it actually converts that air, or the moisture in the air, into soil available moisture. So that's hydrosynthesis. And scientists are now putting a name to something that we've been doing, or our forefathers did for hundreds and thousands of years, and did so very successfully. So sometimes it's not so much about the fact that we need to understand the science, but it's a fact that we need to get back to basics and do it the way we used to do, which is not going to harm the planet. And that's a simple way of looking at it. We don't need to be all be scientists. We don't need to all be media moguls and the Leonardo DiCaprio is going out there and probably making a fortune out of shouting the climate bill. I'm not as good looking as Leo, so unfortunately I don't get paid for what I do, but the idea is to get that message out there. It doesn't matter who you are, and each one of us has a role to play. but understand what that role is and what its impact is. And that's where the media can also play that role, is to just get people to understand it. We can do it very simply with, simple graphics and infographics, and get people to understand what that one little step will do to make a difference to the planet.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much, Chris. So going back to basics, because what we're trying to do is get the message across to the masses, to 8 billion people on the planet, to the 1.6 billion people in Africa. And if we use the complicated ways of communicating, we're not going to get through to them, are we? But also we need to use simple language combined with tried, tested, scientific truth. And ladies and gents, this is what I'm leaving you with today. If you've got any questions, please do feel free to share them in the chats. And we are closing off. Chris, thank you so much for your time and expertise. Wyomia, thank you very much for your time and expertise as well. And I really appreciate us having this conversation. It's definitely not ending here. My aim is that we find collaborations. Chris, you mentioned Footprint Africa and ASEN. So let me just quickly, what I'll do when I share this video, I'll share the links to the websites that you mentioned. And my aim is for us to find ways to collaborate. So stakeholders, different sectors, different disciplines, different professions. If we collaborate and join forces and not only just talk, right? Find a way to take action, even if it's just one small step and we're doing something, we're getting somewhere. So on that note, ladies and gents, thank you so much for your time today. And I'll let you get back to the rest of your day. Thank you. If there's anything that you would
Perfect.
if there's anything you'd like to ask, please free to do so in the chat. I've also posted a link to the rest of our activities for this week. We are extending the conversation. We'll be talking more about product packaging. We'll be talking about textiles. We'll be talking about regenerative food systems and electronics and built environments. So if you feel like you would like to add more into those conversations, please feel free to join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. And for the rest of the week, we will be having these discussions. So I truly appreciate your time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pretty. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Pretty. Thank you, everyone. Have a good day further. Bye.
Bye-bye.